my background is in psychology and cognitive science, but I've also worked in health economics, which I will talk about today again. Then I've founded an NGO in Austria called Effective Altruism Austria. And yeah, next to that, working with the Global Shapers. And I think the main thing of what I do can be summarized in, I like to teach people scientific and clear thinking, especially when it comes to topics around impact and doing good. And you can reach me at Analepticon on basically every social media platform, and feel free to also write me on LinkedIn or wherever you want to. So far about me, but the topic today is impact. And yeah, there's multiple things one can say about this. So first of all, when I hear the word impact, then I feel sick of it because it's such a buzzword. And usually when it gets used, it's just usually very, very empty. And people don't know exactly what they're talking about. But it does have a very precise meaning. And that's what I will talk about today. So I will try to kind of take out the bullshit from the term impact and help you to conceptualize it a bit more clearly. But why do we want to have impact in the first place? Why does it even matter? And given that you're here, I assume you share my worldview there. But there's a lot of problems in the world, and they often need fixing. There's people who need help. And that is a very, very meaningful thing to do. And it's a very nice answer to just really the meaning of life, enjoying your own life, but also contributing to the quality of life of others. That's just a very, very beautiful and deeply meaningful thing to do. And something I think is very valuable to strive for. And given that you're here, I assume many of you share this predicament. So yeah, impact is very meaningful, but is often talked about in a very buzzwordy and empty way. And that's why we're here to change that. So why impact measurement? Why measurement? So yeah, so measurement is like, often there's this quote of like, what gets measured gets managed. By measuring something, you have to, first of all, be very precise what you're even talking about. But of course, it also helps you to just see whether you reach your goals. So it's a very strategic tool. Like once you know what you want from a project and you can conceptualize so that you can measure it, you are also way more likely to actually reach the goals. And of course, the numbers also help you for yourself to see where you have blind spots, where you have not reached your goals. So you know where to just work on further, or it also helps you to just report properly to any investors and so forth, just to tell them what you've actually done and how much you've achieved. So there's really multiple ways why it's super useful to just measure things. And you also usually learn a lot in the process. When like, as soon as you have all the measurements from a project, you can just see where it works well, where it doesn't work well, and so forth. So it helps you with some abstract understanding of just about anything. One of my personal connections to the whole topic is via Quantified Self, which is a movement of people that try to use like different trackers or apps to just basically gather information and to just use it for further self-understanding by just seeing what makes you maybe not productive or not happy. And then you can change behaviors to actually get there. So yeah, measurement is great. Because impact measurement is such a big topic, I tried to boil it down to 10 insights that I want to share with you that help you to just think about the whole topic of impact and impact measurement in a way clearer way. And that's what I want to dive into right now. Okay, so question number 1. Do you know the difference between output, outcome, and impact? Turns out most people who talk about impact do not know the difference, but there is a big difference. And to understand that, you can look at the input to impact model, which just looks like this. And it shows you or gives you a better understanding what impact is all about and what it is precisely, because it differentiates it from other things like outcome or output. And impact is the thing in the very back. So if you take away one idea from this workshop, then this is this thing, right? You can basically leave now, but please don't, because I will teach you further things for sure. So what does this model teach us? it shows us with any project or organization, you have those multiple stages. So the input are the resources you have, the time of your employees, of yourself, the money you might be donating, the skills, the context, just everything you kind of have as resources. You can use those to do things, which is activities, like you can write emails, you can build a school, you can hand out medicine. There's like many, many things you can do. The output is then, just like what the activities created, like for example, a build school, additional teachers hired, and so forth. And the outcome is the further education that was received because of a school or diseases cured. And impact is in the very, very end. And it is the thing we ultimately really care about, like why we do everything. So in this case, it could be quality of life increased, right? So people who are less sick, which is the outcome, will just be happier and have a better time during their life. So impact is the thing in the very, very end. And when you look at the thing, then I put in, this is actually your organization. Like if you work with an organization, the impact usually does not happen in the organization, but outside of the organization. And you have here you have kind of some assumptions of how what you create actually is connected to what you really care about. So here in the end, you have the intentions and planned results that you aim for. And here you have the planned actions, kind of. So just to make more sense out of all of this. So this was idea number 1. And we will head over directly to idea number 2, which is operationalizing. So I come from psychology, and one problem in psychology is that you cannot measure anything that you care about. So you cannot look at someone's face and just directly measure their intelligence or the emotions they have. So what you have to do is to think about how you can measure something given what you see. So this is called operationalizing. You look at, like you define a concept so that you can boil it down to things you can observe. You try to make something observable, and by that you make it measurable, right? So if you can say, if someone does this or that, then they are aggressive, then you can count how often they show this behavior, and by counting how often they show it, you measure it. So that's what you have to do in psychology all the time. And often, this is already a stage that is where a lot of failures happen. So as an example, I really like the idea of just in fitness, many people talk about wanting to lose weight. So they try to measure their success as the number on the scale. But that's, of course, not what you really care about, because what you actually usually want is fat loss, which is also only useful to a certain degree. But so it's really important to know what your goal is, because otherwise you can just think completely wrong. So if you say, oh, your goal is just you really want to lose weight, then I could also, like tongue-in-cheek, suggest to have a part of your body amputated, because it would also decrease your weight. But of course, that's not what you care about. And because, yeah, I just want to use this example to show that really thinking about what it is that really matters is just super important. And when you are not clear about it, you can make big mistakes. So again, from fitness, if you want to, for example, measure things here, when people, as long as people are obese or overweight, of course, them just losing weight is usually very aligned to what you want. But when they are already in a normal body range, then like weight range, then BMI no longer is a useful measurement, because you usually want them to not lose muscles, and so forth. So all of this only to show, yeah, it really matters to have an idea what you really care about and to find a good measure for that. Okay, so number 1, impact to input to impact model. Number 2, we need to operationalize. But then number 3, how do we even know what really matters, like what impact we want to have in the end? So when we want to be strategic and yeah, just start in the end and figure out, oh, what do we actually care about? How do we know that? And of course, for that, there's already a lot of literature just basically in ethics. So we already know a lot of things that are just fundamentally very, very valuable. So yeah, just like I think we can all agree that making people less sad and more happy is kind of nice. Increasing their autonomy and freedom is also kind of nice, and various other things. So there's some things we can all agree that in the distance are kind of meaningful, and that's usually vaguely enough to act on. One thing that is really important in the ethical considerations is to be clear about what is instrumental and what is terminal, because some things we say we really care about, we only care about as a means to a different ends. So for example, I think we all care about sustainability and keeping the globe roughly intact so that, yeah, we just don't destroy it completely. But of course, we would not, for example, trade that for having to kill all the humans, because we actually care about sustainability and the globe and nature so that humans can live a fulfilled and happy life. So one easy example or exercise you can do is doing a thought experiment, whether you would trade one thing versus another, because often then you see, oh, wait, this is actually a means to an end. So here I often like to make the example of, imagine a dictator would offer you, yes, so I will sign this contract and give you the human rights in my country, but for that I will kill half the population. They would be like, yeah, well, I do care about the human rights, but I care about them so that everyone is better off. So I would not actually trade the well-being of everyone for having the rights. So here, all I want to show is many things matter, but some things matter to get something that is even more valuable. And it's important why we actually do things, to not get too stuck with one of the ideas. So yeah, but the main point here is we can learn a lot already from ethics, what roughly matters, and there is a lot, so you don't have to start from scratch. Why do we have to think backwards? Like, why does it matter to first ask ourselves, what do we fundamentally care about? And so one thing that we've learned from psychology is that humans make a lot of very systematic errors when it comes to thinking. For example, in the area of doing good, people actually get less motivated to help when a problem affects many people, because the rough, like even just the quantity of hearing 1 million people are affected decreases our motivation in comparison to one individual story. But of course, if my goal is to help other people, then hearing that I could potentially help 1,000 or 1 million people should make me 1,000 or 1 million times as motivated. But instead, it's the opposite. So less people affected motivates me more. There's many other ways how people make very systematic errors in their thinking. And that's exactly why it's so important to really think backwards and strategically about what we care about. Did I have different? Yes. Okay, so when we try to measure impact, one important concept is just having a key performance indicator. So we've talked about, okay, what do we ultimately care about? So how could we measure that? And one very, very nice example is from health economics. So if you want to think strategically about increasing health, what would be one metric that just kind of captures all the things that are bad about disease that we could just remove, right? And there's two things that are bad about having any disease, really. And one is there are diseases, you will get them, and they're just super strong, and tomorrow you're dead. This means you will just completely lose life years of a life you could have had, but you don't get them. So one thing is life years lost due to disease. But then there's also diseases that do not kill anyone, but they just constantly decrease the quality of life. There's even like small ones, like just neck and back pain, for example. It doesn't really kill anyone, but it's just this constant, really dragging feeling that no one wants to have. So two things here are years lived with disease with quality decreased, and also life years lost. So that's two things that are bad about diseases. And organizations like the WHO put these two metrics into one metric called the DALY, a disability adjusted life year, which tries to measure in one number how bad a disease is, both for life years, like basically how much death does the disease cause, but also how much quality of life does it decrease. And by having this in one metric, it makes just the burden of diseases comparable, so that you then can be more strategic about where you want to start acting in, just having the biggest difference you want to make. I know this is probably quite demanding to understand when you all hear it for the first time. So please let me know if something is not clear, right? I'm completely aware. And last time I did this, there were quite some people who were like, whoa, my head is still spinning. I really need a break first to just let it settle in. So if right now you feel like, whoa, that's already a lot, then it's not, but it's just actually a lot, because I try to pack a lot of topics into one talk so that you take away the most. But yeah, just for a short relief.
Why don't we ask around for a second? Participants, Arusha, Nasima, Tami, how are you?
Good.
Are you with us?
Yeah.
Yes, it's clear till now.
Okay. I just made one big connection from your point of just your starting point of saying you have to be very clear about what you want to achieve and what you want to measure.
Yes.
With yesterday's workshop or Ask Me Anything session with Julia Dujmovic, who said that to achieve an Olympic gold medal means to focus totally for 1 minute or however long these runs are on one single idea of yourself. So it's more or less a connecting message, from totally different fields, and that always gives me like context.
Yeah, no, that's exactly how learning works, by having insights and then connecting them with other things you already know from your life, or you've heard.
I learned something.
You learned something. Yes, and I do think really thinking backwards and starting with what really matters is very grounding, because often really doing NGO work or impact-oriented work is so demanding, and you have so many just little fires you have to extinguish. So it's so easy to get sidetracked as well, and then suddenly you stop caring about why you started all of this, and just like suddenly care, I don't know, about the brand of your NGO, which is important, but it's not why you're doing it, right? So in the end, if you notice you're only doing that, but it doesn't cut through actually helping the people, then you got sidetracked from your why. And so it's just really important to have a rough metric as well, to just refocus regularly. Am I actually reaching the goals for which I'm here? Yeah, so yeah, that's my prep talk around the ideas here. I'll continue with the ideas here, and happy to jump in if anything is unclear. Okay, so key performance indicators, very, very good example from just health economics called the DALI, that just helps you to understand the different burden of diseases globally. And yes, so once we have that, we can go backwards, because when we know, okay, our goal is to decrease the DALI, like the burden of diseases, then we can go well, if that's what I care about, where is the biggest burden of disease that I could tackle? And there's one really, really nice visualization here. So this is from, I think you can just find it if you Google global burden of disease. You will find a tool where you can try this out interactively, and it shows you all the DALIs globally of every human in one picture, and it shows you just how big they are in how bad are they for humanity, and you see it in one picture. So it really helps you to just get an understanding how, where you could have the biggest impact, right? Because if your organization would solve one of those problems completely, then if you would, let's say, you would cure, you would prevent all fire accidents or harms, that's of course way less of an impact as if you would cure all the neonatal diseases and death that are happening. So you just see what the potential of different causes are. So you can think strategically by using a metric like DALYs to just get a comparative idea. And yeah, if we want to use this even more strategically, oh, wait, first another picture. So here, for example, another thing is seeing the global distribution of the DALYs, the burden of disease. So again, you can use that to be more strategic because you see where there is the biggest potential to act in the world to decrease the burden of diseases. So here, yeah, you just see which countries are darker than others, for example. And that shows you that in this regard, just for example, in Austria, where I am right now, there's way less potential than in other countries where the burden of disease is in general way higher still. So just to use the metric to then backwards think with empirical data to make good decisions where you can reach your goals. There's also this nice example of where like animals actually get killed or used, and where money donated to animal charities is going. And you see that like way over 98% are dying in factory farming, but over 60-something% are only going to shelters. So there's of course a big disconnect, and tells you like if you actually care about decreasing the numbers of animals killed or used, then you probably should direct more of your efforts towards factory farming instead of just shelters, because you can basically not even see the numbers of animals in shelters in comparison to factory farming. Yeah, so that's all just, sorry?
That's an interesting take. So we should donate money to farmers so they stop killing the animals.
For example, or to NGOs that try to build plant-based alternatives, or laws that help animals in factory farms. It's about the point to you have this metric of what you care about as your impact, what your key performance indicator is, and then you can go backwards and just look at the world, where are those currently not met. So if your goal is to, yeah, right, to save animal lives, then you can see like where are actually most of the animals dying or suffering, and then you have a more empirical approach to being strategic about reaching your impact. So that's the idea here. And this slide is from Animal Charities Evaluator, but I think I will mention them later again. Okay, so you already made it through the 6 first points, and we will go further with what I've just talked, which is if you want to think backwards from your impact, then you can use a very easy formula. I know it sounds complicated, but it's not really. So if you want to have the biggest potential impact, you need 3 ideas that are super important. So one idea is, how big is the problem that is currently just against the thing you want to reach? Because that's just the maximum amount of people or animals or quality of life that you could just make better. But of course, you will usually not directly fix a complete problem on the world. So the second question is, how tractable is a certain problem? So what is the expected part of the thing you can solve, or how easy will it be to solve something? In decision theory, this is just called the expected value, which is the value, how valuable is something, times the odds, like how likely is it to actually get that. So that's the 2 first ideas. And then the third is neglectedness. Because if there's already 1,000 people working on something, then you being the 1,001st is probably not making that big of a difference. But if there's a relatively big thing that is also tractable and no one is working on it, then the first person going there will make a big difference. So these are 3 really important questions to ask yourself when you want to make a difference in the world. Yeah, okay, so this just explains the idea of why neglectedness matters, which is just the idea of marginal utility. So to make it easier, please don't be intimidated by the slide. Let's just say eating 1 cake is fun, but eating 2 cakes might already be like really disgusting and not adding much quality to your life. So that's the idea of marginal utility. It means like the more you add of something, the less additional happiness it creates. And the same is probably also true for just people that try to solve something. When there's already many people working on something, 1 further person will not make the biggest difference, but there are things that are completely neglected. So look out for that and go there, ideally. Another example here is also how, like, to show the difference between absolute impact or priority versus marginal impact. So the idea here is, okay, so climate change is super, super important. Movie industry and entertainment, not so important, or like not so much should even go there. And then reducing risk from engineered pandemics, also kind of important, right? But nothing compared to climate change. And then you see those lines in how much is already going there. So climate change is very, very important, but there's already a lot funded, but not even half of it, approximately. So there's a lot of potential for more. Movie industry, yeah, there's already a lot of money going there, so we don't need much more of that. And reduced risk from engineered pandemics is way less important than probably climate change, but also there's basically no donations going in that direction currently. So on marginal spending, further donations to topics like climate change are still quite important, but because they're so neglected and no one is donating there currently, further funding reducing risks from engineered pandemics might be super, super important. So that's the idea between how important something is absolutely and how important it is on the margin, like how much additional donation or time should go to a different field. Okay, so that's the idea of being strategic and doing just some heuristics on what matters to reach your goals with impact. Okay. 2 more ideas.
We are having the questions here in the chat. If you would share the presentation afterward.
Of course. I think I can even upload it afterwards directly into the chat, so you can download it directly. Very happy to do so. Someone asked about the colors. I will come back to that later and first finish the 10 points, and then I will come back to your questions here. But very happy to share it afterwards so you can dig deeper. Okay, 3 more, I think, relatively easy ideas to go, and then happy to do further questions and exercises. Okay, so you've already learned a lot to think more clearly about all the concepts here. One other, in this case, quite easy idea is cost effectiveness. So often people want to just, right, when you buy a product, you want to have the best product in relation to the money you're spending. You want a good, price to quality relation, and that's cost effectiveness. And in this model that I've shown you, the input to impact model, when you want to calculate cost effectiveness, then what you do is you look at the input, like how much time did go into it, how much donations, and then you look at the impact. So for example, how many DALYs, disability adjusted life years, were cured with it. So then you can make a rough estimate how much a given intervention costs, costs per DALY prevented, and then you know where you can get the most impact in relation to, for example, donations. So just to clarify that this is the idea of cost effectiveness in this model, which is the beginning input to impact. And what we know is that there are things that are way more cost effective than others. So here, for example, this is from The Economist, an article they wrote about different causes and how expensive it is to, on average, save to save a life of a child. And here you see that for the same money, things like give directly or the worming and giving directly are especially cost effective to do. So these are 2 very famous causes for cost effective donations. So for example, many people don't even know that parasites are globally still a really, really big problem. I think around 1 billion, which is a lot of people still have parasites like schistosomiasis, and per person, curing that is roughly 50 cents per year. So just giving donations in that direction, of course, can easily help many, many people worldwide. And also direct giving to people in need is very powerful, because quite to the contrary to popular belief, they are often especially good at knowing what they need. So making additional assumptions of, for example, sending a goat to another country when we don't exactly know that this is the most important thing to them, are often not as powerful as giving direct cash transfer to people in need, where one organizations, for example, give directly. So yeah, that's all just about the idea of cost effectiveness. You can also see the big difference when, let's say you want to donate $1,000 towards helping animals, then you can achieve on average helping 2.45 when you donate in the direction of animal shelters, but over 70,000 if you direct the money into the direction of usually more factory farming related topics, or like animal charity evaluator recommended charities. Yeah, so again, cost effectiveness is just about the relation from input to impact. Okay, so, but measuring also has, of course, its limitations. And if you learn one thing from science, or anything around measurement, and when someone does not tell you where the usefulness of a tool ends, then don't use that tool, because every tool has its problems, and so does measurement. And measurement, as you probably know, has many, many problems. And one of the problems is the lamppost problem. So there's this idea that a guy like loses his key and is like, yeah, I can't find it. And then the other person starts helping them, and they're like searching at night under the lamppost. And then the other guy's like, but did you actually lose it under this lamp? And the guy who lost his key said, no, it was over there, but it's so much easier to search over here, right? Because of the light. So the idea here is that there is some areas where we just have more data about things, but that does not mean that these areas are necessarily the most important ones. So don't let the metrics only guide where you look, because there's things we don't have metrics about, but then even just making rough estimates are way more important than trying to go by what we already have in data. And then the second thing about limitations is that any observation in measurement is also an intervention. And there's this powerful story from the Soviet Union that wanted the factories to produce more nails. So they said, we will give you funding according to how many nails you make. And then suddenly they got super, super tiny nails that were completely unusable. And then as the next metric, they said, okay, we will give you funding according to like how heavy the nails are. And then they got these huge nails that were again not really usable. So the idea here is that whenever you measure something, people will of course work towards these measures, because that's how they will get, for example, funding. So this idea is just called incentives. There's also the idea that, for example, a policy was made to reduce car usage. So you were only allowed to use your car if it had a car sign that was even, when also the date was even, so that only half the population would use the car on a given day. But what actually happened was that people would just buy a second car sign, because they would just use what was measured to just still fulfill their goals. So two limitations are the lamppost problem. Metric can seduce you to look somewhere because we have data on something, even though something else is more important. And whatever you measure also changes behavior. Yes, and then we come to number 10 already, where I just really want to show you again the main idea that I already showed you, number 1, and how you have now learned to use it. So what is really important is think backwards. What do you really care about? That's the impact, like increasing quality of life, all of that. And then you can use this idea to think backwards and get a good strategy that helps you to get the most out of this in the end. And from that, you can come back to what you actually need to do. So that's the strategic thinking, means you start with the goal in mind, and from that you come up with a strategy and with activities, and then you try to achieve good cost effectiveness, which is you can estimate the input you put in versus the impact you get out, and the relation tells you how cost effective it is what you're doing. And yeah, I think those are the main ideas. And it's always important to figure out how the measures you apply on every stage, of course, change the behavior. Where you might just oversee something because you're not honest with yourself what you ultimately care about. And yeah, check the hypothesis. So between every step, you of course make an assumption how, for example, one thing translates itself into the other. I think that we're the main ideas I wanted to explain to you. Again, this one picture, if you remember roughly this differences in the different stages are, then you're basically set and got the main idea and you're all good. And that was the main part of this workshop. Yay. And now we will move on to actually do some short exercises if you want to. I hope there's actually, right, I don't see you, so I hope there's actually people behind those names and pictures, but I assume so. So the idea we can do now as an exercise is, okay, wait, I'll just quickly.
Shall we ask everyone to turn on their cameras for a second?
That works for me.
Let's see what happens with the connection if we're then all stuck. But let's give it a try. Hello, Elma. Hello,
Okay,
Aneta.
great. People. That's
Yeah,
very...
people's faces, isn't it? Because it's like talking into a black hole. Is it? Their names and cards.
Wow. So my idea was to do a Q&A in the end, but feel free to also just ask right away if you didn't understand something, right? So if something is unclear, let me know. Okay. Very nice to see you all.
Yep.
Okay.
Okay, so no questions at this time?
Okay, so I have 3 little exercises for you, so you can just integrate further what I have just said. And the first one is measure your work. So there's probably something you're already doing for impact, whether it is a lifestyle choice, like say you don't eat meat, or you actually work for an NGO, or maybe you're even like have your own NGO. So you can use the model to go through your work and just figure out, okay, what is my input, right? What are the resources I use? What are the activities I do? What's the output, the outcome, and what is the impact I aim for? So you can just go through it and think about what are the KPIs, like ways of measuring everything, like every step, because you can measure at every step in the model. You can measure how many hours get worked. You can measure how many, I don't know, schools were built and so forth. So that is one exercise you can do. Then the second exercise is take one metric, any one from your process, and just figure out how it could horribly fail. Because it's very important to understand the limitations. So either a metric can fail by measuring something you don't actually care about, or it changes the behavior of people and they misuse it. And this can even be a super easy metric like just hours worked. So if you measure productivity by hours worked, maybe this means that people will just sit in front of the screen for 12 hours without doing anything, because then officially they've worked 12 hours, but just didn't achieve the things that you actually cared about. And then you can use this to think strategically. For example, you can take an SDG as your potential outcome, and then you can think backwards, like what are multiple strategies you could use to reach this goal, and then you can evaluate which has potentially more input, more impact per input. So it just helps you to make a decision about which route to actually choose. This sounds like a lot, but I'll just give you like 10 minutes to scribble down at least some ideas, so you then have better ideas what you can ask me about this. Okay, so I'll just leave you to yourself for 10 minutes on these topics.
Do you mind explaining the last one? Think strategically once again.
Do not mind at all. You're very welcome. So, wait, I'll go back to the model. So here you have the model, right? So this is the input to impact model. And the idea is that often when you have a goal, like let's say we want to reach the SDGs, this is of course a potential outcome we aim for. So we want to, for example, lower global poverty to a certain amount of people. And then you can think from this goal versus via like what potential output could get us there. So because there's not just one thing you can do, but there's many different things you can do that bring us closer to this goal. So one thing could be, we just actually, I don't know, distribute money to everyone who's like officially poor now so that they're no longer poor. But you could also say, we do an education project so that people learn to just, I don't know, be more entrepreneurial, to lift themselves out of that. So there's many different ways you could approach a problem. So you can use them to think backwards from them to evaluate which project is potentially the best one for you to actually reach your part of a goal. Does this make sense?
Helps. Thanks.
Okay, I'll go back to the exercises. And
can you use that, Rusha?
Yeah, I will try.
What do you do? What does your company do?
Actually, it's not only me. We have me and Yusuf. We have both come from the same company. We have started an AI company, artificial intelligence company, and we have developed a product that would actually help understand people. So I mean, the people's personalities. So that is what we do in our company. And carry on. Yeah, so we both doing the same thing. So our goal is to help people to by understanding, help them understand each other, or themselves and each other. So I think that will actually create a great impact. Yeah. Because the conflicts.
So can you use this model to analyze your own project? Of how do you make people understand, and what is the output of that, and how does it further translate?
Yeah, I think we can make we can use this. The impact that we are trying to make is to make the world a better place. So all the conflicts and everything is coming because of misunderstanding. So that
well,
is.
You might have to focus a little more, because the whole world is a very, very broad scope.
Yeah, we actually start from start with ourselves and the people we interact with every day. Like family, friends, and so that way we can reach out to more people, but we'll begin with ourselves. So the first thing is our product will help ourselves to understand ourselves better. We have our product. So it is actually, it focuses on understanding the personality of the person. So by understanding ourselves, we could actually make more connections with people, and so.
Okay. So you can work with these questions now.
Well, hello.
Hello, Yusuf. No, I was just trying to establish
Well, actually, we use
you can
Blue
use the former post-it. questions.
Yeah, actually,
On your special project.
yeah, actually, we use blue ocean strategy to measure impacts, and we have value creation, and we have strategically, because our scope is really wide. So what we do is we focus on individual areas wherever, for example, travel is one area, we have a recommendation engine, so we can recommend anything. So in order to measure impact, we tie it with every client that we have, B2B based. So for example, if it's a movie recommendation, we tie all the creations and everything to them. So it's specific to each and every client. It's AI-based personality prediction plus recommendation engine tied with the personality. So what we do, we have the same thing. For example, for if I'm to give a measurement of impact for a travel agency, we measure destination by personality, activities by, there is value creation. Then we have value raised, cost reduction, and cost elimination. So we can categorize all the impact into those 4 areas, and we have a matrix, and we come up with the client, we talk to them, what can be measured, because we are a data company. So that's basically how it's a long process to, but we get the idea of what Anna has been talking about. I think we can use these things in those things. But
thank you.
Impact, yeah, the impact measurement part, we don't. It's something new that we have to. We don't measure actually, so that's very helpful. We can use that.
Thank you very much. How's your company called?
It's UTOTO AI. UTOTO AI.
Okay, very, very curious.
We have already we have a demo also launched. We are going to launch our application very soon. So I think you'll like it, but we're just waiting for the success to make the noise rather than talking about it too much.
Okay.
Nice, very good. As a psychologist, sounds very curious. How are the others doing with the exercises? Do you understand them, and did you have some insights? Like, I don't know who, can't see your name right now.
Hey, I unfortunately missed the first part of the presentation because I was working, sorry. I was just thinking about the measure you work. So I work in consulting development, and currently I just started a new project, and we actually haven't done our metrics yet. But for the stakeholder engagement, I think I figured out that there are 2 main things. So we are doing commercial bids, but what we want to do is to fewer bids and have more wins. But this is not part of the plan yet, as in it's not a agreed upon measure. So I think I'm basically going to talk to my manager after this because he gave me the idea. So that would be really easy to do, because that's basically month by month measuring how many bids did we put through and how many did we win. Just basically to increase the quality of work and profitability and so on. And also 2 things that I'm doing is trying to get the bids team and the senior leadership team to agree with each other, because at the moment there is lots of confusion and disagreement. But I think that would be a lot more difficult to measure, especially without changing it, because I don't think just asking how you're getting on with the commercial director right now is sufficient.
Yes.
So yeah, I don't know if you have any suggestions or anyone has any suggestions for stakeholder management.
That's of course not really part of impact measurement itself, but more like a strategic question how to actually do that. So when you use the model, when you define impact and think backwards from it to be strategic, then this is just right. This is the idea of strategic thinking, or also partially just like management thinking, that you just try to reach very certain goals. But when you try to actually come up from like where you stand right now with what you should do, and give them all the constraints, because you can't do everything, of course, then this forward thinking that's also very common in entrepreneurs is called effectuation. Maybe that's interesting to you to Google or like to just look up, because I found the difference here very, very interesting. And yeah, so what you're saying is trying to make people agree on stuff. I think that's part of activities, right? So you could ask yourself, how would that look like? So for example, if you say, why do you, because you always basically with the next step you ask, why are you doing it? Because you've always had having sub goals, right? So if you say there's people who have to agree to each other, then that's probably because you want them to either act in one or the other way, but together, but forward in some way. So you can say, okay, it's part of the activities to make them agree on the thing, and then the thing we can do because of that, that's the output probably. So that's how you can just use this model here to probably put stuff in.
Yeah, I think that's right. It's just nice to have a tool. It makes it a bit easier.
Yeah. And then you can just use it to basically ground yourself again in what your like far away goal is, like why in the end, in the absolute end, do you actually do what you do? And that's often like very value based, right? So just because in the end you don't really care about whether the people all agree with each other, but you want them to function together to create certain things in the world usually.
Sure, thanks.
Hope that helped. Okay, back to here. Okay, but I don't know if the rest of you is currently doing the examples, but we can, if you want, you can just give me a metric and we can talk about how it could fail, just to get an intuition for that as well. So let's say, just one example I also like is, let's say we care about CO2 that was absorbed in a project. Of course, you could completely game this metric by just first building a machine that produces a lot of CO2 in a room, and then you absorb it with the second thing you've created, but you haven't actually done anything about the CO2 in the environment that you really care about, but you have absorbed a lot of CO2, which is a cool metric. But it's not what you really care about when you say you want to reduce CO2. So that would be an example how one could just game a metric. And that happens with many metrics. I'll just leave you alone with the question for like 3 more minutes, and then we will move on. Okay, so I will slowly move on now. I hope the exercises just gave you some further intuition on, yeah, just how stuff works, how you can use the model to think forward with it and just measure whatever you are already doing, but you can also use it backwards to think through which potential path is more, yeah, useful to reach a certain goal. And always at any stage see how a metric just can fail by not capturing what you care about or by incentivizing people to behave differently than they did before. And then the second thing after this short exercise is the idea of having some breakout rooms. So we're not that many people, so if you want to, we can also directly share ideas in the big group here. But I'm also happy to put you into small breakout rooms if you want to have just if you want to share in small groups with each other what you do and how you can use the model for that. So Matthias, what do you think is better with that group size?
I don't know if all the participants are in the same motivational, on the same level of motivation, since I don't see all the faces.
Yes.
So I'd go back to asking everyone to turn on the cameras so we see how is the situation. Hello, Yusuf again. Well, how about Hassan, Elma, Tami, Julia? How are you guys? Maybe if we all start talking at the same time now, this is difficult. So maybe we use the chat to say, do you want to stay in one big group or do you want to split up? Because I really can't decide for the group.
I think one group would be enough.
If someone disagrees, just write it into the chat and then just see if someone feels unhappy with that. Yes, so no one is really writing anything, so I assume we leave it to that. I cannot see all the names here, but from all the people who haven't yet shared anything, do you want to talk about how you have used the model to measure your work or try to reach a goal? So
I suggest Hassan to maybe, do you have a lot of background noise, or because you wrote this very interesting message in the chat, and I think it's something to share in the group probably about using AI to help kids, to help the teaching.
Nice.
I see you writing again.
Wow.
But everyone's for one big group anyway, so this is all the feedback from the chat. And I see Hassan typing. Okay.
Wow.
So let's stay in the big group.
Yes, so that's a really good. I hadn't seen the long message, so thank you, Matthias, for pointing me towards it. First of all, sounds like a really great project, especially with like just educating people about tech in general is important, and it's kind of like literacy by now. So teaching it to kids seems also quite important. Winning a competition seems like a measurement of success, but it probably measures more how socially perceived you are rather than your goal, which is how many people get educated, right? So I assume the outcome would be here, right? How much education was received, which you can measure really in, let's say you have a certain curriculum with certain ideas. Let's say there's like 100 things people, or like in this case, kids should learn. Then you can just check in the end, like how many people have learned how many of the parts of the content. So you have a quite good measure, like people that in general received any education, but also how much of the education outcome you could also measure is just, you could check back later in their life, how did their life develop in comparison to people or kids who did not get the education and so forth. So there's many different measurements you can use. And then activities or like input you can just use is like how much money or time do the people in your team actually spend on your charity. And output could just be like, okay, like how well is the platform built that you use for that, or how many courses did you create, things like that. So that would be multiple things that you could measure here. But of course, winning a competition is something really nice. So congrats on that.
Anna, this the impact quality of life increase. It's also a very broad concept, right?
Yes.
Quality can be different to different people. So how do you quantify it in a way that it can be measured?
This depends a lot on what goal you really work on. So for example, right, as I said, in health, the DALIs are a good measurement because they try to really measure both the quality of life that was not decreased by disease, but also death that was prevented, which are two very important parts of problems we have with diseases. So when it comes to health, then this is a good measurement. You can always go backwards from the problem you're solving. So for example, let's say you create an app that is helping people to deal with their anxiety. Then you could say, okay, the impact is just, again, like quality of life increased, but in this case, it's, for example, anxiety that was not had. So if you measure before and people on average have, I don't know, so and so many panic attacks and hours of anxiety, then your impact could be how much less hours of anxiety do they have, and so forth.
Yeah, but I'm thinking that it comes with a lot of assumptions. These assumptions must be supported somewhere, right?
Yes.
Some studies or something, right?
Absolutely, yes. So you're making a really, really good point, which is at every step you make assumptions of how an outcome connects to something else. So if you, I don't know, try to give certain education to then make people healthier or whatever, you assume they will use that to show more like healthier behavior, or that they are actually in control of that, so and so forth. So in every step, you make assumptions of how that will play out and how a certain outcome can be connected to a certain impact. So and that's super important because by looking at the individual steps here, you often see what needs to happen in between, right? So there's always, this error is always a very, very big assumption. And to clarify the individual steps helps you to be more precise with yourself, what you assume about the world here. And yes, in general, measuring happiness is super, super hard. So one of the hardest things to measure. And there's many biases when you measure it in retrospect and ask people just how happy they are. They are often very distorted because they will just report how they feel right now about their life. So what's happening there is more experience sampling, which is just random noises where they like, tell me how you feel right now, and then you would track that over time. So yeah, it's all super difficult to do in actual life. So I would not advise you to directly measure happiness. But yeah, you have to make some assumptions whenever you do anything.
Can I say something?
Yes.
Again, if anyone else doesn't have anything to say. Yeah, I actually came from I also came from an NGO that empowers women in tech here in Maldives, called Women in Tech MV, which aims to minimize the barriers that girls and women face in this industry, and also who wants to join the tech industry, which is actually a male-dominant industry. Very compared to the males working here in the tech industry, very few girls and women are there. So what we do, I mean, the activities are, we have conducted awareness creation sessions and coding classes to educate them and to bring more girls into tech fields. So we have also sent girls to global events, and we have to get more exposure, educate. Also, we have conducted events to educate the society uh, about the challenges that we are facing. So the input, can we say the input is the time and energy and money we have put on that. What can you say about this regarding?
Sorry, the question is what you could put in the other categories.
Yeah, the impact. Actually, the impact. I believe the impact could be the um, to minimize the barriers. To minimize the barriers. Or maybe that is the outcome, right?
Yes. Yes, because the impact is probably not just reducing the barriers, but actually getting people, women into that positions potentially.
Yeah. That could be that must be the result. Because of the barriers and challenges that we are facing, more girls and women actually they are hesitant to come to this field, join the industry.
So in this case, if you could you can make multiple assumptions on why this is not happening, why women are not that much into tech. I did not understand you completely because there were some interruptions from the connection, but you can make various assumptions, or like you can brainstorm multiple ways of why this is not happening. What exactly are the barriers? And then of course the output would be to tackle that in some sense. So this could be a mindset thing, right? So like just women partially just not even knowing they can go in those positions. So just more girls being educated that they are completely capable as everyone else to go in those fields could be a measure, right? Just like how many girls per school feel able to even go in a technical field, or that they can choose from that. So just checking how are the mindsets. But you can also look at, I don't know, like percentage of women that are invited to job interviews or something. So there's just multiple things you can use here, and then depending on where you want to intervene, that's of course what you would measure. But there's so many. So the easiest measure is always to just count. Just binary, right? So if like in this case, if we would assume it's a mindset thing, I'm not saying that I believe that, it's just an example. I don't think it's the main thing, but you could just count like how many girls would raise their hands if you ask them, could you now after school, for example, choose to study something technical? And then you can compare, say, just like that, did it go up after our interventions or something like that? So just binary question, yes or no, and the amount of people, that's one very easy measure you can always make.
Actually, since we have started, that has changed a lot. I mean, we are actually, we have started in 2018, the end of the 2018, and by now a lot of new we have as a result of conducting awareness and sessions. I think a lot of girls were actually inspired to join this. As a result, I think when we advertise the Hour of Code, there is this upcoming event, Hour of Code. I think it's a global event. So when we advertise, a lot of school kids join this event.
Yes.
So compared to 2 years back, I think it's a lot of fun.
Yes, so that would, for example, be something you can also measure, right? Just like event attendance, and then you can. That's just a very, very easy metric, right? Just how many people are there listening in the first place? that's one metric you can use. And like on social media, it could be just like the views. How often has a certain educational content be seen? That's all metrics you can use, and it's just very important to be clear at which stage you're measuring, whether something is instrumental for what you care about, or whether it's the thing you care about in the end, really. Because for example, if something is educational content about wearing a mask during COVID, then views of that content is not what you ultimately care about, but what you actually care about is like the output, like people who have like understood that, right? Like, I should do this. Then outcome, how many people actually put on their masks, and then impact, how many corona infections were prevented by people putting on their mask. So it's just important to really know why you do something, and that's exactly why this model matters, so that you're just very clear. What are your goals? What is nice, but ultimately a means to an end, but not the thing you ultimately care about. So that just helps to really clarify many small things here.
There's an external factor actually. Without us doing much, I think this COVID pandemic has helped us a lot to bring more people into into tech field.
Yeah,
They are more aware. They all actually believe. A lot of people now actually believe. They are actually forced to believe that without tech we can't go on with our lives in a pandemic like this.
Yeah, that makes sense in that regard. So we have to wrap this up soon, and I have to, I will tell you to please go back to the main platform.